Tom lived on a quiet street where most neighbors kept to themselves. The houses were neat, the lawns were trimmed, and the trees cast long shadows in the evening. Tom liked the calm life. He enjoyed mornings with warm coffee, watching birds land on the trees, and evenings walking along the sidewalk. His home was small but comfortable. It had a garden where he planted flowers every spring, and a little porch where he sometimes sat and read. One sunny morning, Tom decided to help a neighbor. The neighbor's cat had gone missing a few days ago, and she was worried. She asked Tom if he could make a sign to post in front of his house to help find the cat. Tom agreed. He grabbed a piece of cardboard, wrote simple letters, and painted a small picture of a cat. The sign said clearly that a cat was lost and asked anyone who saw it to call a number. Tom placed the sign carefully in the small patch of grass near the sidewalk. He stepped back and looked at it. The letters were neat, the drawing was simple, and the sign would help people notice the message. As Tom stood there, finishing the placement, he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Two men were walking toward him. They were not wearing uniforms, but their shirts had printed badges that looked like law enforcement badges. One was tall with a stiff walk, and the other was shorter and stockier. Both had serious expressions. Tom stopped what he was doing and watched them calmly. Something about them felt wrong. The taller man spoke first. His voice was loud and commanding. He said that Tom was placing signs without permission. He claimed to be part of the HOA police team, responsible for enforcing street rules. Tom raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of HOA police. The shorter man stepped closer and nodded, as if confirming everything the taller man said. Tom smiled politely. He wanted to remain calm. He said, "I am just helping a neighbor. There is no harm in this sign." The taller man did not smile. He pointed at the sign and said, "This is against our rules. You cannot place anything without prior approval. If you do not remove it immediately, there will be consequences." Tom noticed that neither of the men had real police identification. Their badges looked printed on their shirts, and their tone was more like they were pretending to be serious. Tom stayed calm. He did not argue, but he observed everything. The men clearly wanted to scare him, and they assumed he was an ordinary resident who would comply. "Can you show me any official permission or document?" Tom asked politely. "I would like to see proof of your authority." The shorter man frowned. "Proof is not necessary. We enforce the rules here. You must follow instructions." Tom nodded. "I understand rules, but I also need to know if they are real. Can you show me a document or ID? Otherwise I cannot follow your instruction." The taller man's face darkened. He raised his voice slightly. "We do not need to show you anything. Remove the sign now or you will face penalties." Tom did not move. He kept his hands by his side. He wanted to see how far they would go. He knew that they had no real authority, but he wanted to handle this calmly. The shorter man took a step forward, trying to appear threatening. He said, "You do not understand. This is serious. We have authority to remove items and charge fines." Tom stayed polite. He said, "I respect the street rules, but I must follow laws. HOA cannot act as police. You are neighbors, not officers." The taller man glanced at his companion. They both looked frustrated. They were not used to someone questioning their power. Tom smiled slightly. He remained calm and quiet, letting the two men show their true nature. Tom decided it was time to reveal the truth. He slowly reached into his pocket. Both men leaned in slightly, thinking he might back down or apologize. Tom pulled out his wallet and opened it carefully. Inside was a real badge. Not a printed badge, not cheap plastic, but a real federal agent badge. He held the badge so that both men could see it clearly. Their faces changed instantly. The tall man froze. The shorter man's eyes widened. Their mouths opened, but no words came out. They had expected an ordinary resident, someone easy to intimidate. They did not expect a trained federal agent standing calmly in front of them. Tom spoke in a steady voice. "I am a federal agent. You are pretending to be officers. This is a serious violation. Wearing fake badges and giving threats is against the law." The two men glanced at each other. Fear and confusion showed on their faces. They had tried to act powerful, but their act had ended the moment Tom revealed the truth. Tom lowered his voice slightly. "You have no authority. You cannot make rules for people on this street. You cannot threaten residents. I am asking you to remove the badges and stop pretending." The shorter man swallowed hard. He stepped back. The taller man moved slightly, unsure what to do. They looked embarrassed and nervous at the same time. Tom's calm approach worked better than yelling or shouting. He did not need force. He let the truth speak for itself. He kept his tone firm, but friendly, showing that he was not there to punish them unnecessarily. A few neighbors had begun watching from their windows and porches. They saw the two men freeze in place as Tom held his badge. Whispers moved along the street. Some neighbors were surprised, others curious. No one stepped out yet, but the atmosphere changed. Tom continued, "You need to understand that respect works better than fear. You cannot act as officers if you are not trained or authorized. You need to stop this immediately." The men nodded quickly. They could not argue. Their threats were empty, and now everyone could see it. The taller man mumbled something about a misunderstanding. The shorter man apologized quietly. Both removed the fake badges from their shirts. Tom put his badge back into his wallet. He smiled politely and said, "I hope this lesson helps. You can be part of the neighborhood, but you cannot act outside the law." The men nodded again and stepped away. They did not try to act tough anymore. They walked down the street slowly, heads low. The neighbors watched quietly. They now knew the men had no real authority and that Tom had handled the situation calmly. After the men left, Tom returned to the sign. He adjusted it slightly and stepped back. The sun was warm on his face, and the street felt calm again. He knew that the lost cat would soon be found, and the sign would help the neighbor. More than that, the street now had a quiet reminder that truth and calm action could solve problems better than fear. Tom walked back to his porch and sipped his coffee. He looked at the quiet street. The birds sang, the wind moved gently through the trees, and life went on. He felt satisfied. He had helped a neighbor, taught a lesson, and kept the street safer without raising his voice or using force. From that day on, the two men never tried to act as HOA police again. They still walked the streets sometimes, but they no longer intimidated anyone. The neighborhood became calmer, and people respected each other more. Tom kept his small life simple. He did not brag, he did not look for praise, and he did not act for attention. He only acted when necessary and always stayed calm and fair. The sign stayed in the yard until the lost cat was returned. The neighbor was very thankful. Tom smiled and said it was no problem. Helping someone in need felt better than any recognition. The street had learned an important lesson. True authority does not come from badges or loud voices. True authority comes from knowledge, action, and respect for the law. Tom had shown this quietly, and the neighborhood would remember the lesson for a long time. The sun was slowly setting, and the shadows grew long. Tom walked down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. He waved to a neighbor who had stepped outside. Life felt peaceful again. For Tom, this day was simple, calm, and meaningful. The day after the incident, Tom woke up early. The sun had barely risen, and the street was still quiet. He went outside to check his garden. The flowers had grown a little taller, and the grass was soft from the morning dew. The lost cat had not yet been found, but Tom remained hopeful. Helping neighbors was something he took seriously. As he sipped his coffee on the porch, he noticed movement across the street. The two men who had pretended to be HOA officers were standing near their house. They seemed tense, their shoulders stiff. They whispered to each other, glancing frequently at Tom. He did not move. He only watched and observed. Tom knew that people who tried to intimidate others often changed their behavior after being exposed. Sometimes they retreated. Sometimes they looked for new ways to regain control. These two men clearly had no authority, but their pride was hurt. Tom decided to remain calm and not engage immediately. He wanted to see what they would do next. Later in the morning, a few neighbors stepped outside. Some were curious. They had heard about the incident, and they wanted to understand what had happened. Tom greeted them politely. He explained briefly that the two men were pretending to be officers. The neighbors nodded, surprised. Many had assumed the men were real authorities, and some even felt nervous about them. "I did not want anyone to get scared," Tom said quietly. "I only wanted to show the truth. Pretending to be an officer is serious. It is also against the law. We should all follow rules together, but real rules, not fake ones." The neighbors listened carefully. They seemed relieved. One woman, Mrs. Davis, said, "I am glad you stood your ground. We all felt afraid. We did not know what to do." Tom smiled politely. Fear should not guide actions. Calmness and truth guide people better. Now that everyone understands, things can be peaceful. By midday, the two men had moved back inside their house. They did not come outside again. At least not for now. Tom watched from his porch. He noticed that they seemed to be discussing something seriously inside. Occasionally, he saw them gesture nervously toward his house. He wondered what they were planning, but he did not feel threatened. He knew he had handled the situation legally and safely. Tom decided to check the neighborhood for the lost cat. He walked slowly, calling out softly. "Here, Kitty, Kitty," he said. He checked behind trees, in bushes, and near parked cars. He did not find the cat, but he left small notes with his number for anyone who might see it. As he walked, neighbors waved and greeted him. They seemed more relaxed. Some even asked if he wanted to join a small community meeting about street safety. Tom nodded politely but declined. He preferred action over meetings. He believed that helping people quietly and calmly was better than making speeches. Later that afternoon, while returning to his house, Tom noticed something unusual. A small piece of paper was slipped under his gate. He picked it up carefully. It was a note with a warning. The handwriting was shaky. It said that he should remove all signs from his yard or face trouble. Tom frowned. He knew immediately that it was from the two men. He read the note calmly. He did not feel fear. Instead, he thought carefully about the next step. Threats, even small ones, could escalate if ignored. But he also knew that reacting with anger or force was not wise. He needed a strategy that was legal, safe, and effective. Tom went inside and made a few phone calls. He contacted his office, explained the situation, and asked for advice. His supervisors told him to document everything and stay calm. They confirmed that the two men had no authority. and the note was only an attempt to intimidate him. Tom decided to take action quietly. He set up a small camera on his porch to record the front yard. He did not need it for aggression. It was only to document any future incidents. This way, if the men tried anything illegal, he would have proof. That evening, Tom sat on his porch again, watching the street. The sun was low, and the shadows grew long. The street was quieter than usual. The two men had not appeared again. Tom thought about their behavior. They had tried to control the neighborhood with fake authority, but once exposed, they were unsure how to act. He also thought about the neighbors. Many of them had felt intimidated, and some were hesitant to speak up. Tom understood that fear could make people silent. That was why he had acted calmly and legally. He wanted to show that truth and authority based on knowledge could solve problems without anger over the next few days. The street slowly returned to normal. The two men stayed mostly inside. Occasionally, Tom saw them through the windows, watching the neighborhood carefully. They seemed tense but did not try to contact him again. Tom continued helping the neighbors. The lost cat was eventually found near a small park 2 blocks away. Tom returned it safely, and the neighbor was very grateful. She thanked him several times. Tom only smiled and said, "I am glad the cat is safe. That is enough." Even after the cat was found, Tom noticed a few small signs of suspicion from the two men. They occasionally glanced at him when walking past. Their tone changed when speaking to other neighbors. Tom remained calm. He knew that exposing them once was not always enough. Some people needed to see consistent behavior to change completely. Tom also thought about teaching others in the neighborhood about safety. He wanted people to understand that fear should not control their actions. Calmness, observation, and truth were more important. He suggested small actions like walking in groups, helping each other, and reporting unusual activity to real authorities. A week later, the two men stopped their small attempts to intimidate. They no longer spoke to neighbors about rules or fines. Their fake badges were gone, and their presence was quieter. Tom observed them from a distance. He noticed that they seemed to be learning a lesson. Real respect came from fairness and truth, not threats. Neighbors slowly regained confidence. Some came to Tom for advice on how to handle conflicts safely. He shared calmly that remaining polite, documenting events, and involving proper authorities was the best approach. People listened. They realized that fear was not necessary. Tom also reflected on himself. He felt proud, but not proud in a boastful way. He was calm, thoughtful, and careful. He had acted to help others and to protect the neighborhood. He had used his knowledge and training responsibly. That, he thought, was more important than recognition. The street became peaceful again. Children played safely outside. Neighbors chatted over fences, and life returned to a calm rhythm. The two men remained neighbors but no longer tried to act as officers. They learned that pretending to control others brought no respect. Tom continued his simple life. He worked quietly, helped neighbors when needed, and walked his small dog in the evenings. He kept the camera as a reminder to stay cautious but did not feel the need to use it. The street had learned that calm action and truth were more powerful than threats or lies. One evening, as Tom walked down the sidewalk, Mrs. Davis waved and said, "Thank you for teaching us how to stay calm and safe." Tom smiled politely. We all learn from experience. It is better to act carefully and kindly than to act out of fear. The sun set slowly, painting the street in warm colors. Tom felt satisfied. The neighborhood was safe, the lost cat was back, and the two men had learned their lesson. He knew that peace could be restored not with anger or force, but with calm, thoughtful action and clear understanding. Life on the street continued peacefully. Tom maintained his small garden, helped neighbors when needed, and kept an eye on the neighborhood. The two men remained cautious and no longer tried to intimidate anyone. The street learned that real respect came from honesty, lawfulness, and calm action. Tom returned home, sipped his evening tea, and smiled quietly. Another day had passed, calm and safe, and the neighborhood was slowly becoming stronger because of simple actions, truth, and courage. A few days after the incident with the fake HOA officers, Tom was back to his usual routine. He woke up early, watered his small garden, and made a cup of tea before heading out to check the street. The neighborhood had become calm again, but Tom remained alert. He knew that people who tried to intimidate others once could sometimes attempt other methods later. He wanted to be prepared but not paranoid that morning. As Tom stepped onto the porch, he noticed a small car slowly driving past his house. The car was old, a dull color, and it moved carefully, as if the driver was watching something. Tom paused and observed. The driver seemed to glance at his house repeatedly, and then the car stopped near the corner. Tom did not panic. He calmly stepped back inside, closed the door partially, and watched through the window. The car stayed for a few minutes, and then a man stepped out. He was middle-aged, wearing a plain shirt and jeans. He carried a small briefcase and walked toward Tom's house. Tom stayed calm and did not approach him immediately. The man rang the doorbell politely. Tom opened the door and greeted him with a neutral smile. "Hello, can I help you?" The man smiled back but seemed a little nervous. "Good morning, sir. My name is Peter. I am a community inspector sent to check for certain rules in the neighborhood." Tom raised an eyebrow. Rules? I thought all inspections are announced in advance. Who sent you? Peter hesitated. I work for the city office. I am here to ensure that signs and other objects in yards follow local regulations. I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind. Tom nodded politely. Please, come in and have a seat. I am happy to cooperate. As Peter entered, Tom noticed that he was careful with his steps. He placed the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were some papers, a clipboard, and a pen. Nothing looked unusual, but Tom observed him carefully. Thank you for letting me in, Peter said. I am here because a few complaints were made about signs on the street. My job is to check if all signs are following the rules. Tom remained calm. I understand. I only placed a sign to help a neighbor find a lost cat. I am happy to show it to you and explain. Peter nodded. That is good. I appreciate your cooperation. Tom walked to the yard and pointed to the sign. This is the sign. It is simple and only contains information about a missing cat. It is temporary and meant to help the neighbor. I hope it does not violate any rules. Peter looked at the sign carefully. He took out a small form from his clipboard and made some notes. It seems fine. This is a temporary notice, not permanent. There should be no issue. But I need to make a report for the office, as complaints were made. Tom nodded politely. I understand. You can include all information accurately. The sign is temporary, and it helps a neighbor. Peter wrote down the details. He asked a few more questions about when the sign was placed and how long it would remain. Tom answered truthfully. He also mentioned the incident with the two men who pretended to be HOA officers. Peter seemed interested but professional. After about 20 minutes, Peter closed his clipboard. Everything seems in order. I will report that the sign is temporary and there is no violation. You are cooperating fully, which is appreciated. Tom smiled. Thank you. I like to follow the rules, and I also want to help my neighbors. Peter nodded and stood up. I must continue my inspections. Thank you for your cooperation. As he walked toward the door, Tom observed carefully. There was nothing unusual about Peter. His briefcase, his form, and his questions all appeared normal. Still, Tom noted every detail, just in case. Peter left politely, and Tom closed the door behind him. He took a deep breath and smiled. Everything had gone smoothly. The new visitor had not caused any problems, and the sign remained safe. Later in the afternoon, Tom noticed that a few neighbors were outside again. They were talking quietly. Glancing toward his house, Tom walked toward them slowly. Good afternoon, he said. Is everything all right? One neighbor, Mr. Lee, nodded. Yes, Tom, we just wanted to see that the inspector came and left. Some of us were worried. Tom smiled politely. There was nothing to worry about. The sign is temporary, and everything is in order. The inspector was professional and polite. Mrs. Davis added, it is good to know that the authorities follow the rules properly. We can trust them more than those fake badges. Tom nodded. Yes, real authority comes from following the law and being honest. Pretending to control others is wrong, and real respect comes from truth and calm action. The neighbors seemed reassured. Tom continued walking down the street slowly. He noticed the two men who had pretended to be HOA officers standing near their house again. They looked at him, but this time, they did not approach. They seemed tense and cautious. Tom thought about them. He knew that people who try to intimidate others could sometimes return with different tactics. He decided to remain alert but calm. Fear was not helpful. Observation and readiness were more effective. The following day, Tom continued his routine. He walked to the park near his street, checked his mail, and waved to neighbors. Life seemed normal, but Tom kept his attention on small details. The two men had become quieter, but their behavior was still cautious. One evening, Tom noticed something unusual near the corner of his street. A small group of people was standing quietly. They seemed to be observing the neighborhood. Tom slowed down and watched from a distance. He could not identify them clearly, but they appeared to be discussing something quietly. Tom did not approach immediately. He went home, watched from the porch, and observed the group through binoculars. He noted their size, clothing, and movement patterns. Nothing indicated immediate danger, but he wanted to be prepared. After about an hour, the group dispersed quietly. They walked down the street slowly and left the area. Tom noted their departure and returned to his home. He knew that sometimes threats did not appear immediately. Calm observation and documentation were important. The next day, Tom decided to write a short note to the neighbors. He left it at each house. The note reminded everyone to observe their surroundings, report unusual activity to real authorities, and remain calm. Tom also included simple safety tips, such as walking in groups and keeping track of small signs and notices. Neighbors appreciated the note. They came to Tom and thanked him. They said that it helped them feel safer. Tom smiled politely and said, "Safety is better when we are calm, careful, and watchful. Fear is not helpful, but attention is useful." Over the next few days, the street slowly regained a sense of normal life. Children played outside, neighbors chatted over fences, and the small park was busy with families. The two men who pretended to be HOA officers remained cautious and did not interfere. They had learned that pretending to have authority brought no respect, only exposure. Tom continued his simple routine. He watered his plants, walked his dog, helped neighbors, and observed the street carefully. He did not seek recognition, but he acted responsibly when needed. His calm and thoughtful actions helped the neighborhood feel safer and more peaceful. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, Tom saw Mrs. Davis walking her dog. She waved and smiled. "Thank you for everything, Tom. We feel much safer now." Tom nodded politely. "It is better to act with calm and truth than to act with anger or fear. I am happy that things are peaceful again." The two men who had caused the initial trouble continued to observe quietly from their house. They seemed to understand that Tom was not someone they could intimidate. Real authority was more powerful than fake badges, and their actions were limited from now on. Life on the street continued peacefully. Tom's simple actions, his calm attitude, and his careful observation had restored a sense of safety and trust among the neighbors. Everyone learned that respect came from honesty and knowledge, not fear and threats. Tom returned home, watered his plants again, and sat on the porch. The sunset painted the sky with warm colors. He took a deep breath and smiled quietly. Another day had passed, calm and safe, and the neighborhood was slowly becoming stronger because of small, thoughtful actions and respect for the law. A few days after the inspector visited, the neighborhood seemed peaceful. Tom continued his simple routine of watering his garden, walking his dog, and helping neighbors. The lost cat had been safely returned, and many neighbors had regained their confidence. Life appeared calm, but Tom remained cautious. He knew that people who tried to intimidate others could sometimes return in new ways. That morning, Tom noticed something unusual. The two men who had pretended to be HOA officers were talking to a small group of people he did not recognize. The group stood near the corner of the street, whispering and pointing toward his house. Tom observed quietly from his porch. Their body language suggested that they were planning something. Tom's training as a federal agent told him to stay calm, watch carefully, and gather information before acting. Tom stepped inside his house and prepared a small notebook. He documented everything he saw, the number of people, the direction they moved, their clothes, and any unusual behavior. He also checked his porch camera to ensure it was functioning properly. Observation was the first step. He needed clear evidence before anything else. Around mid-morning, a young man approached Tom's yard. He looked nervous and carried a clipboard with papers. He claimed to be a local volunteer for the HOA. Tom smiled politely and invited him to sit on the porch. "Hello, I am Max," the young man said. "I am helping with neighborhood safety and checking signs. I wanted to ask a few questions." Tom nodded. "Please, have a seat. I am happy to answer any questions, but I must ask that you tell me your authority and provide proper identification." Max hesitated. He fumbled with the papers in his hands. "I am just a volunteer. I report to the HOA board. They want to ensure that all signs follow rules. I have a list of houses to check." Tom observed carefully. He noticed that Max avoided eye contact and spoke nervously. Tom remained calm and polite. "I understand. You may ask questions, but I also need to record this. Can you provide your name and contact information for the record?" Max gave a shaky answer, but Tom wrote it down carefully. He answered all of Max's questions truthfully. The sign was temporary, meant only to help a neighbor. It was not permanent, and it did not violate any real rules. After about 20 minutes, Max left, still looking nervous. Tom watched him walk back toward the group near the corner. The group seemed to be discussing something quietly. Tom noted the details in his notebook. The situation was unusual, but nothing illegal had occurred yet. Observation and documentation were the best approach. Later that afternoon, Tom walked down the street to check on neighbors. He noticed Mr. Lee and Mrs. Davis talking quietly. They looked concerned. "Tom, have you noticed those people gathering near the corner?" Mr. Lee asked. "They seem to be watching houses and taking notes." Tom nodded calmly. "Yes, I have observed them. They appear cautious but organized. There is no immediate danger, but we should remain alert and document everything. Observation is important. Calmness is more effective than fear." Mrs. Davis frowned. "Do you think they are planning something?" Tom shook his head. "I do not know, but planning is not always dangerous if it is lawful. Our role is to observe and respond responsibly. Any illegal action will be reported to authorities immediately." Tom returned home and checked his camera footage. He noticed that the group had stayed near the corner for several hours, observing multiple houses. Their behavior seemed coordinated, and they occasionally wrote notes. Tom remained calm. He knew that patience was key. Acting too quickly could escalate the situation unnecessarily. The following day, a small package appeared at Tom's gate. It was plain and unmarked. Tom carefully picked it up and examined it. Inside were a few pamphlets about HOA rules and a note suggesting that he remove all signs immediately. The handwriting matched the notes he had seen before. Tom realized that the two men were trying to pressure him again, but this time they used indirect methods. Tom did not feel threatened. He documented the package, took photographs, and stored it safely. He also called his office to report the incident. His supervisors advised him to continue monitoring the situation and to stay calm. They emphasized that threats and indirect intimidation were serious but manageable if handled properly. That evening, Tom spoke with a few neighbors. He explained the situation calmly and advised them to remain observant. These people are trying to create fear, but we must remain calm. Document anything unusual and report it to proper authorities. Cooperation and caution are important. Over the next few days, the group continued to observe the street quietly. Tom noticed that the two men who had pretended to be HOA officers were leading the group. Their gestures and whispered instructions were clear, but they remained cautious. Tom realized that they had learned a lesson from the previous exposure, but were still trying to assert some control. Tom decided it was time to take further action. He prepared a small report, including all observations, photos of the packages, and notes on the group's behavior. He shared the report with his office and local authorities. The authorities appreciated the detailed documentation. They assured Tom that they would monitor the situation and intervene if necessary. With the authorities informed, Tom felt more confident. He knew that the situation was under control and that any illegal action would have consequences. The street began to feel safer again, though vigilance remained important. One evening, as Tom walked down the street, he noticed the group gathering again. This time, they seemed more cautious. They whispered to each other and avoided eye contact with neighbors. Tom smiled quietly. Their behavior indicated that they understood he was prepared and aware. Calm observation had already influenced their actions. Tom continued to help his neighbors. He assisted with minor tasks, offered advice, and remained a friendly presence. People began to regain confidence in the neighborhood. They realized that fear could be replaced by calm action and careful observation. A week later, the group finally dispersed. The two men who had caused the initial trouble remained in their houses, quiet and subdued. Tom noticed that their attempts to intimidate neighbors had ceased. They seemed to understand that respect and calm action were more powerful than threats. Tom continued his routine without interruption. He watered his garden, walked his dog, and observed the street. The neighborhood had learned an important lesson. Calmness, observation, and truth were more powerful than fear and intimidation. One afternoon, Mrs. Davis approached Tom with a small gift. "Thank you for your help and guidance, Tom. You have taught us to remain calm and safe." Tom smiled politely. "We all learn from experience. It is better to act calmly, observe carefully, and respond wisely than to act out of fear." The street had slowly returned to normal life. Children played outside, neighbors chatted over fences, and life was peaceful. Tom knew that maintaining vigilance, helping neighbors, and acting responsibly would continue to keep the neighborhood safe. The two men who had pretended to be officers no longer attempted to control others. They stayed in the houses quietly, observing from a distance but no longer making threats. The street learned that true respect came from honesty, knowledge, and calm action. Tom returned home and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The warm colors filled the street, and the neighborhood felt safe again. He took a deep breath and smiled quietly. Another day had passed peacefully, and the neighborhood was stronger because of careful observation, calm action, and truth. Weeks had passed since the initial incident with the fake HOA officers. Tom continued his daily routine, but the events of the past few weeks had left a lasting impression on the neighborhood. The residents were more aware, more cautious, but also more confident. They understood that calm observation, honesty, and legal action could prevent problems without creating fear. Tom began the morning with his usual walk around the block. The sun was rising slowly, casting a golden light over the street. He waved to neighbors he passed. Children were playing in front yards, and a few people were tending to gardens. The two men who had pretended to be HOA officers remained in their houses, quiet and subdued. Their attempts to intimidate others had stopped completely, and their presence no longer caused concern. Tom returned home and made a cup of tea. He sat on the porch, observing the street. His mind was alert but calm. He thought about how quickly fear could spread among people and how a single act of truth could restore peace. He had learned the same lesson personally. Calm, thoughtful action was more effective than aggression. Later that day, a small group of neighbors gathered near the park at the end of the street. They had organized a casual meeting to discuss ways to keep the neighborhood safe and connected. Tom was invited, and he attended politely. "Tom, we want to thank you," Mrs. Davis said. "Because of you, we feel safe again. You showed us that calm action and truth are stronger than threats." Tom smiled gently. "We all learn from experience. The important thing is to remain calm, observe carefully, and act responsibly. Fear is not useful, but attention and understanding are." The neighbors nodded in agreement. They began discussing small improvements for the street, organizing neighborhood watch schedules, checking that signs and notices were legal, and helping one another with small tasks. Tom listened quietly, offering advice when needed. He encouraged cooperation and community spirit, emphasizing that unity and respect were more powerful than fear or intimidation. After the meeting, Tom walked home slowly. He noticed the two men who had once pretended to be HOA officers standing near their house. This time, they did not look threatening. Instead, they kept their distance and watched quietly. Tom continued walking. But he understood that their behavior had changed because they had realized the consequences of false authority. Respect could not be forced, and pretending to control others only brought embarrassment and exposure. The following morning, Tom found a small gift at his porch. It was from several neighbors as a token of gratitude. Inside was a handmade card and a simple box of treats. The card expressed thanks for his guidance, patience, and calm leadership. Tom smiled quietly and placed it on his table. Recognition was not his goal, but he appreciated that the neighbors valued truth and fairness. Tom's routine remained simple. He tended his garden, walked his dog, helped neighbors with small tasks, and continued to observe the street. The neighborhood had returned to a rhythm of calm, respectful life. People greeted one another, children played safely, and families felt more secure. One afternoon, a young boy approached Tom while he was trimming flowers. "Sir, can you tell me how to stay safe?" the boy asked. Tom smiled and knelt slightly to be at eye level. "Always pay attention, listen to your parents, and observe what is happening around you. If something seems wrong, tell someone you trust. Calm thinking is more important than fear." The boy nodded eagerly. "I will, sir. Thank you." Tom returned to his gardening, feeling that the lessons he had learned and shared were taking root in the younger generation. Teaching others about calmness and observation was as important as protecting oneself that evening. The two men who had once tried to intimidate the neighborhood approached Tom. They were cautious but polite. One of them spoke first. "Tom, we want to apologize for what we did. We acted foolishly and caused unnecessary fear." Tom nodded calmly. "I accept your apology. Everyone can make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them and act responsibly." The men nodded again. "We will not pretend to be officers again. We understand that respect cannot be forced." Tom smiled slightly. "That is good. Cooperation and honesty are stronger than threats or lies. Your actions from now on can show respect, not fear." The men left, walking quietly back to their house. Tom watched them go. He felt satisfaction, not from confrontation, but from resolution. The street was peaceful, and the lesson had been understood. Days turned into weeks. The small incidents that had caused tension slowly faded from memory. The street remained calm. Tom's neighbors became more confident in handling small issues. They organized casual gatherings, shared resources, and helped one another with minor tasks. The neighborhood had grown stronger, more connected, and safer because of these experiences. Tom's sign had long been removed after the lost cat was found. It had served its purpose. More importantly, it had shown the value of calm action and adherence to rules. People realized that small acts of truth and courage could prevent larger conflicts. One morning, as Tom walked down the street, he noticed children playing near the park. Parents were watching, neighbors were chatting, and the two men who had caused trouble were quietly tending to their yard. Life had returned to a natural rhythm. Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Peace was restored, not by fear, not by force, but by careful observation, truth, and calm action. Later that day, Tom decided to write a short note to the neighbors. He left it at each house. The note reminded everyone to remain calm, observe their surroundings, and act responsibly if they saw unusual activity. It emphasized cooperation and community spirit, rather than fear or confrontation. Neighbors appreciated the note. It reinforced the lessons learned over the past weeks and reminded everyone that safety was a shared responsibility. Tom returned home and sat on his porch as the sun set. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink. The street was quiet, calm, and peaceful. He sipped his tea slowly, reflecting on the events of the past few weeks. The neighborhood had faced a challenge, learned a lesson, and grown stronger. He thought about the two men who had once pretended to be officers. They had caused fear, but they had learned a lasting lesson. Real respect came from honesty and calm action, not from intimidation. The neighborhood had seen this firsthand, and it would remember the lesson for years to come. Tom also reflected on his own actions. He had stayed calm, observed carefully, and acted responsibly. He had helped his neighbors, protected the neighborhood, and restored peace. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not from recognition, but from knowing that truth and calmness had made a real difference as darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky. Tom stood on his porch and looked down the street. The neighborhood was quiet, the lights in the houses glowed warmly, and the street felt safe. Children's laughter had faded for the evening, neighbors were settling in, and the two men who had once caused fear were now part of a calm, respectful environment. Tom smiled quietly to himself. Another day had passed. Peace had returned, not through threats, not through power, but through patience, calm action, and truth. The neighborhood had learned a valuable lesson. Real authority came from knowledge, honesty, and respect. Pretending to control others only brought exposure and embarrassment. Tom walked inside, feeling satisfied. He knew that the neighborhood was safe, his neighbors were more confident, and life had returned to a calm rhythm. He had helped create a community based on respect, observation, and responsibility. For Tom, that was the most important achievement of all. As he turned off the lights and prepared for the night, he thought quietly about the future. There would always be challenges, small incidents, and misunderstandings, but he also knew that calmness, observation, and honesty could overcome them. The neighborhood had seen it, and they had learned it. Tom went to bed that night feeling at peace. The street was calm, the neighbors were safe, and the lessons learned over the past weeks had created a stronger, more connected community. Peace had been restored, and it would continue as long as the residents remembered the importance of truth, calm, action, and respect for one another.